In Daniel chapter 7, we have a sequence of powers and events. First is a lion with eagle's wings, which represented Babylon. They ruled from 605 to 539 BC. Then the second beast, a bear, represented the Medo-Persia Empire. They conquered Babylon in 539 and ruled until 331. The leopard beast is Alexander the Great's Greece, which ruled from 331 to 168 BC. Next, we have the fourth beast, a dragon with iron teeth, which represented the old Roman Empire ruling from 168 BC all the way to 476 AD. Next in our sequence of events are the 10 horns. This represented 10 divisions of Rome, and this happened by the year 476 AD. Then the little horn comes up next, after the 10 horns are established. The little horn is the same as the Antichrist of Bible prophecy in Revelation chapter 13. Friends, it is extremely important to take the time and put these dates and powers in their proper order. And the reason is because this shows us that the little horn, who is the Antichrist, cannot come into prominence until at least the year 476 AD. Now, let's start examining the internal evidence of Daniel chapter 7 itself, and we are going to point out 10 characteristics of the little horn. Who is the little horn? Does the Bible give us any clues as to who this power is? And can we be absolutely sure of who the Antichrist is? God is going to make it in such a way that you're not even going to wonder, can it be this power over here? Is this the little horn? Or is it this one over there? There will be only one that we can point to as the fulfillment of who this power is. There will be no doubts in your mind when we're through this study of who the little horn, which is the Antichrist, is. Characteristic number 1. The little horn arises from the fourth beast. Daniel 7 verse 8 says, I considered the horns, and behold, there came up among them another little horn. So if the little horn comes from the fourth beast, which is the old Roman Empire, does this mean the little horn might be Roman in some way? Characteristic number 2. The little horn arises among the fourth beast, which is Rome. Where was the old Roman Empire centrally located? It was Western Europe. Should we look for the rise of the Antichrist in the Middle East? Are we to look for the little horn to rise up in Africa? What about China or Australia? No, it must be in the area of Western Europe. This is according to the Bible. So think about it. This characteristic here restricts geographically where the little horn will rise up from. Characteristic number 3. The little horn arises after the 10 horns. This characteristic is found in verse 24. And the 10 horns out of this kingdom are 10 kings that shall arise. So there's the 10. And another, this is the little horn, shall rise after them. When were the 10 horns or kingdoms established? By what date? We found out it was the year 476 AD. And if the Bible says the little horn rises after them, this means the little horn cannot come upon the scene until at least the year 476. So far in our first 3 characteristics, the little horn or the Antichrist must be Roman in some way. He's going to rise in the territory of where the old Roman Empire was located geographically, which we know is the area of Western Europe. And it will not come up into prominence until at least after the year 476 AD. Friends, this is the Bible's internal evidence. We're not making anything up. Characteristic number 4. When the little horn comes forward, it plucks up 3 of the first horns, meaning those 10, by the roots. Daniel 7 verse 8 says, "There came up among them another little horn, before whom there were 3 of the first horns plucked up by the roots." So after the 10 divisions of Rome are established, when this little horn comes forward, he is able to pluck up by the roots 3 of these 10 kingdoms. Notice what else the Bible says about this point. It uses different terminology when speaking about these 3 kingdoms that are plucked up by the roots, by the little horn. In verse 8, which we just read, it says, 3 of the first horns were plucked up by the roots. But then in verse 21, and before whom 3 fell. And then in verse 24, it says, the little horn, when he comes forward, he shall subdue 3 kings or kingdoms. So when we put this information together, that means this little horn, when he comes forward, he is going to totally annihilate 3 of these 10 kingdoms. And by the way, when you pluck something up by the roots, can it come back? No, it doesn't exist anymore. If I were to pluck up a plant by its roots, it's gone. Now think about this. We're looking at 10 characteristics of who this little horn Antichrist power is. But if we were to just dwell on this one point alone, and if we could find out who was responsible for annihilating 3 of the 10 divisions of Rome, we have our suspect. You will know exactly who the little horn is, but God gives us much more evidence. Characteristic number 5. The little horn will speak great things and blasphemies. Verse 20 says, the little horn has a mouth that spake very great things. Now, what are these great things the little horn speaks? Are they wonderful and beautiful words? Or is this something different? While verse 20 says the little horn has a mouth speaking very great things, notice verse 25. It says the little horn shall speak great words against the Most High. In other words, against God himself. So these are unbelievable things that this little horn is speaking. But now let's go one further. In Revelation chapter 13, verses 5 and 6, speaking about the Antichrist, which is the same power as the little horn here of Daniel 7, it says this, "And there was given unto him a mouth speaking great things and blasphemies, and he opened his mouth in blasphemy against God, to blaspheme his name and his tabernacle," that's the sanctuary, "and them that dwell in heaven," which would be the angels. So these great things that the little horn speaks are not wonderful things. These are blasphemous things against God. What is blasphemy and what does it mean to speak blasphemies? I may have my definition of blasphemy and you may have yours, but let's allow the Bible to explain what this means. And by the way, think about this. This word blasphemy is really a word that is only used within religious circles. Mark chapter 2 will give us a definition of what it means to speak blasphemies. Starting in verse 5, it says, "When Jesus saw their faith, he said unto the sick of the palsy, Son, thy sins be forgiven thee. But there were certain of the scribes sitting there and reasoning in their hearts, Why does this man thus do what? Speak blasphemies. Who can forgive sins but God only?" So according to the Bible, when a mere man claims that he can forgive another man's sins, this is blasphemy. They are speaking blasphemies according to the Bible. Now we know that Jesus can forgive sins because he is God. But the Pharisees did not believe Jesus was God, so in their minds he was speaking blasphemies. So friends, mark it down. We are looking for a power that claims they can forgive man's sins. This is the Bible's internal evidence. The little horn power, the Antichrist, whoever it is, will claim that he can forgive man's sins. Another example of what it means to speak blasphemies is found in John chapter 10. Jesus makes a bold claim and says, "I and my Father are one." What is Jesus claiming when he says this? He is saying that he is equal with God the Father. But now notice verse 31. Then the Jews took up stones again to stone him, because stoning was the punishment for someone claiming to be equal with God. Then it says, Jesus answered them, "Many good works have I showed you from my Father. For which of those works do ye stone me?" But now notice what they say to him. The Jews answered him, saying, "For a good work we stoned thee not, but for blasphemy, and because that thou, being a man, makest thyself God." So this means that the little horn will not only claim to forgive man's sins, but he will also claim to be equal with God while here on earth. Friends, can you think of a power that claims to forgive sins and they also claim to be equal with God? If you think about it, there is only one organization on the entire planet that claims to forgive man's sins. Characteristic number 6. The little horn is a persecuting power. Verse 21. And the same horn made war with the saints and prevailed against them. And then in verse 25, it says, speaking of the little horn, and he shall wear out the saints of the Most High. Not only does this little horn persecute and kill people, but the Bible says he actually persecutes the people of God, the saints. So this would mean that whoever this little horn is not considered the people of God. Again, this is the Bible's internal evidence. We are not making anything up. Characteristic number 7. If it's called a little horn, it must be a little kingdom in the world that wields mighty power and influence. Characteristic number 8. The little horn will try to change God's law, and he will think he has successfully done so. Notice verse 25. It says the little horn would think to change times and laws. Everything this little horn does is against God. The little horn speaks great words against God. He persecutes God's people, and he is going to think in his mind that he has changed God's law. Characteristic number 9. The little horn will be different. Verse 24 says, and he, the little horn, shall be diverse from the first, meaning he's going to be different from the 10 kingdoms that he came up among. And how will that be? Characteristic number 10. The little horn power will rule for 1,260 prophetic days. Verse 24, and they, meaning the saints, shall be given into the little horn's hand until, notice, a time, times, and the dividing of time. How long is time, times, and the dividing of time? We need to know, because this is prophetic time. A time in symbolic prophecy represents 1 year. Times represents 2 years, and the dividing of time is obviously half a year. So we have 1 plus 2 plus half a year equaling 3.5 years. The Bible rule for a year is 360 days. So this would mean that the time, times, and the dividing of time, which is 3.5 years, would be 1,260 days. Again, these are prophetic days. In prophecy, a day equals a year. Ezekiel 4 verse 6 says, I have appointed thee each day for a year. And then in Numbers 14 verse 34, notice the wording, after the number of the days in which ye search the land, even 40 days, each day for a year, shall ye bear your iniquities, even 40 years, and ye shall know my breach of promise. Does the Bible give us this information that times, and the dividing of time is actually 1,260 days? In Revelation chapter 12, we have a woman that flees into the wilderness. In the same chapter, there are two parallel verses that pretty much say the same thing, but yet when it comes to the time element, it expresses things differently. Notice verse 14. And to the woman were given 2 wings of a great eagle, that she might fly into the wilderness, into her place, where she is nourished, now notice the expression, for a time and times and half a time from the face of the serpent. That's the same time period the little horn rules for in Daniel chapter 7. But now notice verse 6 of the same chapter. It repeats the same information. And the woman fled into the wilderness, where she hath a place prepared of God, that they should feed her there, notice, 1,260 days. A score is 20, so 60 would be 60. So by comparing these two verses, we see that time, times, and half a time is the same as 1,260 days. So this means the little horn would rule for 1,260 literal years. These are the 10 characteristics that we have pulled from the internal evidence of Daniel chapter 7. Again, who is this little horn? Remember, this little horn is the Antichrist of Revelation 13, where he is called the beast. Who do you think it is by considering the characteristics that we have pulled internally from the Bible right here in Daniel 7? Remember, friends, the little horn must be Roman in some way. The little horn arises in the area of what is now Western Europe. The little horn can only come into power and prominence at least after the year 476 AD. And when the little horn comes forward, he uproots completely 3 of those 10 horns that he came up among. The little horn speaks blasphemous things against God, and we found out that this would be a power that claims that he can forgive sins and also claims to be equal with God. The little horn was to persecute God's people, so it's a persecuting power that kills and sheds blood. And because it's called a little horn, we are looking for a little kingdom somewhere in Western Europe that wields mighty power and influence. We are also looking for a power that thinks he has changed God's law. The Bible also says we're looking for a power that is different in some way than the 10 kingdoms that it came up among. And then we are also looking for a power that has ruled for 1,260 literal years. Who do you say the little horn is? God in his mercy wants us to know, because what if we fall into the hands of this power and become deceived and ultimately lost? Friends, in our next presentation, we will positively identify who this little horn is. God bless.